Personal injury law isn't probably something you think about very often unless something happens to you, and then you suddenly need to know if you have any legal options. Here to break it down for us, Grand Rapids personal injury attorney Tom Sinas of Sinas Dramas Law Firm, our sponsor. He's advocated for those injured in West Michigan for more than 10 years. Tom, thanks for joining us here today on 8West.
Thank you so much for having me.
And let's just start with the basic. Just because someone is injured, do they immediately have a claim, or are there certain criteria that people need to meet in order to get there?
It's an excellent question, because there is this common misconception that just because someone was hurt, therefore they may have a claim, or someone else may be responsible. And of course, it isn't as simple as that. There are a series of elements, we call them elements, or things on a list that have to be checked off in order for someone to be able to pursue a personal injury case. So the first concept is what the law calls duty. And duty in this case just means that there has to be some kind of legally recognized relationship between the person who was hurt and the person against whom they may pursue a claim. So most scenarios that people think of, the law says, yes, there is a legal duty here. So drivers on the road, they owe a duty to one another. A lawyer and a client, a doctor and a patient. These are common examples that we don't even think about as being a legal duty, but that's where it starts. There are other cases, though, where the existence of a legal duty isn't so clear. And without a duty, there is no claim. So let's assume there is a duty. The next question is, was that duty breached? The law would say breached. What does that mean? It just means that in that particular circumstance, did the person who caused the injury, did they act in a way that was below what we would call the standard of care for that moment, below a reasonable level of safety? So to use a car, for example, we have these rules of the road called the Michigan Motor Vehicle Code. If one of us breaks one of those rules, that's evidence that one of us was not acting safely. But in other circumstances, like the case of a lawyer and a client, or a doctor and a patient, the question of what that standard of care is a lot more complicated. So that's breach. Was the duty breached? And then the next question is, did that breach of that duty, did it cause an injury? This is sometimes called causation, or the fancy legal term is proximate cause. And most of the time, this is kind of obvious, right? Somebody gets into a car crash, they break their leg. We know that that car crash caused the break in the leg. Other times, however, it isn't so obvious. And this oftentimes gets into the injured person's medical history and what they brought, so to speak, to that moment, and whether or not you can establish that the injury that they're claiming was caused by that breach of the duty. So that, in a nutshell, is personal injury law, and all those elements have to be met before you get to the next question, which is what amount of compensation might be owed.
And let's stick with the basics here. So say someone is at fault. What are the basic standards that have to be met to determine if someone is liable?
Great. Okay, so everything we just talked about is the first steps: duty, breach, causation. The question of liability, I think you're getting at how much liability. That gets to the last question, which is the injured person's damages. The law calls these damages. I think it's easier to think of them as harms. What type of harms did the injured person experience? Some of these are very obvious: medical bills, lost time from work. Some of them are also obvious, but maybe less easier to put a number on. So changes in one's quality of life. If somebody has a serious injury, their life is often completely changed in every respect, and that's an element of damage. So it's those elements of damage that are the question, really, that speaks to the extent of someone's liability.
And then if you can prove all of that, what are the other things that we need to know about?
Well, you need to know not only about all these elements that we talked about, but you also need to know, how does this all fit into your decision maybe to hire a lawyer? You know, what does a lawyer in this area, how do they work? Under what terms do they represent clients? And only then, and that's really a subject for a different discussion, but only then can the person make a good decision about whether or not they want to pursue a claim and what their expectation of that process is, because it really is a process. Once you've determined that you think you have a claim, then the process that happens next is maybe a discussion for a different day.
And when is the best time? Because that is also the question is, first of all, how do we get in contact with you? What's the best way? And when should we be reaching out to get your expertise?
Okay, so the first part, people can contact us on our website, sinusdramus.com. They can call us at 616-301-3333. And those numbers and that website, of course, is available anytime. The question of when is an excellent one, and my general thought here is sooner than later. There's no reason to wait. Oftentimes people feel a little skittish, or sometimes I've found that people are somewhat a little shy about contacting a personal injury lawyer. Maybe they thought this wasn't something I was ever going to have to do. But generally, you're better to inquire early. If the question is, well, we're not sure, then okay, fine, then we're not sure. But sometimes evidence is really important and it needs to be gathered quickly. So there could be an event that happened, a car crash or something else, where you want to gather evidence sooner than later, and usually waiting makes it harder to do that. So my advice to folks, if you think you have a claim, don't psych yourself out and think you don't. Call a law firm like ours, and we've always got somebody there to talk you through it.
All right, Tom, thanks so much for stopping by 8West today. And the segment is sponsored by Sinas Dramus Law Firm. We'll be right back with more 8West.
.3333, and those numbers and that website, of course, is available anytime. The question of when is an excellent one, and my general thought here is sooner than later. There's no reason to wait. Oftentimes people feel a little skittish, or sometimes I've found that people are somewhat a little shy about contacting a personal injury lawyer. Maybe they thought this wasn't something I was ever going to have to do. But generally, you're better to inquire early. If the question is, well, we're not sure, then okay, fine, then we're not sure. But sometimes evidence is really important and it needs to be gathered quickly. So there could be an event that happened, a car crash or something else, where you want to gather evidence sooner than later, and usually waiting makes it harder to do that. So my advice to folks, if you think you have a claim, don't psych yourself out and think you don't. Call a law firm like ours, and we've always got somebody there to talk you through it.
All right, Tom, thanks so much for stopping by 8West today. And the segment is sponsored by Sinus Dramus Law Firm. We'll be right back with more 8West.